The relentless storm battered the old cabin, but it wasn't the howling wind or the crashing thunder that kept me awake that night. It was the shadowy figure persistently knocking on my door and windows, leaving me trapped in a cocoon of terror until dawn. I had decided to spend a weekend alone at my family's secluded cabin deep in the forest, hoping to find some peace amidst the chaos of everyday life. The cabin, old and creaky, had always been a place of solace for me, a refuge where I could escape and lose myself in the tranquility of nature. That night, however, a violent storm raged outside, the rain and thunder creating an almost deafening symphony. As I sat by the flickering candlelight, reading a book, I could never have anticipated the terror that awaited me in the heart of that storm. The calm of the evening was shattered when I heard a series of knocks at the door, startling me from my book. Despite the storm raging outside, the sound was unmistakable. My heart raced as I approached the door, my mind racing with questions. Who could be out there in such weather? I opened the door cautiously, but there was no one there, only the relentless rain and the howling wind. I peered into the darkness, but saw nothing. A shiver ran down my spine as I closed the door, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I returned to my seat, attempting to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe a branch had hit the door, or perhaps the wind had created the noise. I tried to focus on my book, but my mind kept drifting back to the knocks. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, as if the elements themselves were conspiring to heighten my anxiety. Minutes later, the sound came again, but this time it was different, louder, more insistent, and coming from the window. My heart pounded as I turned to look, dread pooling in my stomach. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the cabin feel even more isolated and vulnerable. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just outside the window, staring directly at me. The figure was indistinct, a dark silhouette barely illuminated by the lightning flashing in the distance. Fear gripped me as I realized that someone, or something, was out there, watching me. I stumbled back, the terror rising within me. Who was this figure, and what did they want? The questions swirled in my mind as I locked the door and windows, hoping to keep whatever it was at bay. The storm outside continued to rage, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. I spent the rest of the night in a state of heightened fear, every sound amplified by the storm. The knocks continued, relentless and unnerving, each one sending a fresh wave of panic through me. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that the figure couldn't get inside, but the fear was overwhelming. I huddled in the corner of the room, my eyes fixed on the door and windows, praying for the storm to end and the figure to disappear. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity as I listened to the ceaseless knocking. The storm seemed to close in around me, the cabin feeling smaller and more suffocating with each passing moment. The intensity of the knocks varied, sometimes soft and almost polite, other times loud and frantic. It was as if the figure was trying to communicate, to convey a message that I couldn't understand. The sheer persistence of the knocking wore down my nerves, leaving me a trembling mess. The relentless knocking grew louder and more frantic, pushing me to the brink of panic. I could hear the figure moving around the cabin, the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Every so often, the knocks would pause, only to resume with renewed intensity, as if the figure was growing more desperate. My attempts to stay calm were futile. I could feel my sanity slipping away with each knock, each gust of wind rattling the windows. The shadowy figure seemed to get closer, the darkness outside pressing against the thin walls of the cabin. I was trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help me. A sudden crash outside sent a jolt of terror through me. It sounded like something heavy had been knocked over or thrown. I strained to listen, my heart racing, wondering if the figure had found a way inside. The silence that followed was even more unnerving, leaving me in a state of tense anticipation. Finally, as the first light of dawn crept through the trees, the knocks stopped. I waited, tense and alert, until the sun fully rose before daring to move. When I finally looked outside, the figure was gone, leaving only the memory of the night's terror. The experience left a lasting mark on me. Even now, the thought of that night sends chills down my spine. The cabin, once a place of peace, had become a symbol of fear, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for another stormy night to return. I never returned to the cabin alone after that. The terror of that night had embedded itself deep within me, a constant reminder of the unseen horrors that lurk in the dark. Every time I hear the sound of rain against a window, I'm transported back to that stormy night, the relentless knocking, and the shadowy figure that watched me from the darkness. But wait, there's more. Brace yourself for the next spine-chilling tale. And if you're enjoying the scares, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness, but it was the lightning that revealed my true nightmare. Standing in the hallway, staring directly at me, was a shadowy figure that disappeared as quickly as it appeared, leaving me in a state of paralyzing fear. I was home alone on a stormy night, the kind of night that makes you feel both cozy and a little on edge. The rain pounded against the windows, and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. I had always found storms somewhat comforting, but that night, the feeling of unease was stronger than usual. As the storm intensified, the power suddenly went out, plunging the entire house into darkness. I was in the living room, armed with nothing but a flashlight. The familiar surroundings felt alien and menacing in the flickering light, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The storm raged outside, the sound of thunder rattling the windows. I sat in the living room, the flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The house, usually a place of safety, felt like a dark, foreboding cave. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning, illuminating the room in brief, blinding bursts. As I sat there, trying to stay calm, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The storm seemed to amplify every creak and groan of the old house, each one sending a shiver down my spine. The darkness felt oppressive, pressing in from all sides, and the small beam of my flashlight seemed woefully inadequate against the encroaching night. I tried to reassure myself that it was just my imagination, that the storm and the power outage were making me jumpy, but the sense of unease grew stronger with each passing minute, a feeling of impending dread that I couldn't shake. Suddenly, a lightning bolt lit up the room, and for a brief moment, I saw it. A figure standing in the hallway, looking directly at me. It was a shadowy silhouette, indistinct but undeniably human in shape. The sight of it sent a jolt of terror through me, and I screamed, dropping the flashlight. The beam flickered as it hit the floor, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move and writhe. I scrambled to pick it up, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, but this time, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty, the only movement the curtains fluttering in the breeze from a slightly open window. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that the lightning and shadows had played tricks on my mind. But the image of the figure, standing silently in the hallway, was seared into my memory. Desperate to find some explanation, I began to search the house. I moved from room to room, the flashlight beam shaking with my trembling hands. I locked every door and window, checking and double-checking to make sure they were secure. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of the wind outside, made me jump. I searched every corner, every closet, every darkened nook where someone might hide. But there was no sign of the figure, no evidence that anyone had been there. The only sound was the relentless pounding of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. The house was empty, yet the feeling of being watched lingered, a constant presence just at the edge of my awareness. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, not after what I had seen. I sat back down in the living room, the flashlight clutched tightly in my hand. My eyes darted to the hallway every few seconds, expecting the figure to reappear at any moment. The storm outside continued to rage, the lightning casting fleeting shadows that kept me on edge. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness: the ticking of the clock, the rustling of the wind, the distant roll of thunder. My senses were heightened, every nerve in my body on high alert. I felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. I couldn't shake the image of the figure from my mind, its presence a constant weight pressing down on me. I was trapped in a state of hypervigilance, unable to relax, unable to let my guard down for even a second. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke through the storm clouds, the feeling of dread began to lift. The figure had not reappeared, and the house seemed to settle into its familiar stillness. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, the tension slowly draining from my body. I stayed awake until the sun was fully up, unwilling to risk another encounter in the dark. When I finally felt safe enough to move, I checked the house again in the daylight, finding everything exactly as it should be. The storm had passed, leaving a calm, almost eerie quiet in its wake. The experience left a deep impression on me. I couldn't explain what I had seen, and the memory of the figure haunted me long after that night. Every time a storm rolled in, I felt a pang of fear, a reminder of that terrifying moment when the lightning revealed something that shouldn't have been there. To this day, the image of that shadowy figure standing in the hallway remains vivid in my mind. The fear and uncertainty of that night are never far from my thoughts, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that can lurk in the dark. Ready for another dose of fear? Stay tuned for the next terrifying story. Subscribe and tell us which story scared you the most. The storm raged outside, but the most terrifying part was not the thunder or the lightning. It was the soft, insistent voice calling my name from the darkness, growing louder and closer with each passing minute. It was a night meant for relaxation. I was home alone, enjoying the solitude and taking the opportunity to watch a movie. The rain was pouring heavily, and thunder occasionally shook the house, adding to the cozy yet slightly eerie atmosphere. As the storm intensified, I felt a sense of calm, cocooned in the safety of my home. Little did I know, the storm would soon bring something far more unsettling than mere thunder and rain. Amidst the sound of the rain and the movie's dialogue, I heard a soft voice calling my name. At first, I thought it was part of the film, but the voice came again, clearer and more insistent. My heart began to race as I muted the TV and listened closely. The voice called my name again, this time unmistakable. It seemed to come from outside, cutting through the sound of the storm. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the voice had a hauntingly familiar tone that sent chills down my spine. I stood up, straining to hear over the rain and thunder. The voice persisted, calling my name with an urgency that made my skin crawl. It was as if someone was out there in the storm, desperately trying to get my attention. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and dialed my parents' number. The call connected, but just as I started to explain, it abruptly dropped. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the sense of isolation growing stronger. The voice called again, louder this time, as if it was getting closer. With a flashlight in hand, I cautiously approached the door. I peered out the window, my breath fogging up the glass. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind howled through the trees. There was no one outside, just the relentless storm. But the voice, it sounded so close. I shone the flashlight into the darkness, but it revealed nothing. The voice called my name again, this time a whisper that felt like it was right next to my ear. I jumped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The fear was becoming unbearable. The whisper was so close, so intimate, that it felt like someone was standing right beside me. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, but I was alone. The voice, however, continued to call my name, each whisper more urgent than the last. Desperate to shut out the sound, I rushed through the house, locking all the doors and windows. I could feel the fear growing inside me, a cold, creeping dread that refused to be ignored. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, seemed to carry the voice calling my name, refusing to let me find peace. I huddled in a corner, my back against the wall, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. The voice was relentless, whispering my name over and over, driving me to the edge of panic. I tried to block it out, to focus on anything else, but the fear was overwhelming. The hours stretched on, each minute feeling like an eternity. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, and the voice continued its haunting refrain. I couldn't tell if it was coming from outside or from within my own mind. The sense of being watched, of being pursued, was almost unbearable. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move with malicious intent. The voice never ceased, calling my name with a persistence that frayed my nerves. I couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. All I could do was sit there, waiting for the storm to end, praying for the voice to stop. The storm seemed to amplify every sound, every creak and groan of the house becoming a part of the voice's torment. I was trapped in a cycle of fear and anticipation, my mind racing with thoughts of who or what could be calling my name so insistently. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the storm started to subside. The rain slowed to a gentle patter, and the thunder grew distant. The voice, too, began to fade, its calls growing softer until they were nothing more than a memory. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by exhaustion and lingering fear. I stayed awake, waiting for full daylight before I dared to move. When I finally felt safe enough, I checked the house again, finding everything in its place, as if the night of terror had been nothing more than a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. The memory of that voice, calling my name with such desperate urgency, stayed with me. Even now, the sound of rain can send a shiver down my spine, reminding me of that night. The voice in the rain may be gone, but the fear it instilled remains, a haunting reminder of the unknown dangers that can lurk in the darkness.